Hello, everyone. Welcome to the September live chat in our 2024 series about the AAAS and Science, Technology, and Policy Fellowships. My name is Marab Sarwar. I am the Recruitment Director here at STPF, and I'll be your moderator today. This series of live chats is your opportunity to ask fellows your questions, and we hope that through these chats you can see how the fellowship can impact policy and transform your career. So really excited you're here. September and October are the last 2 months of the fellowship, or the last 2 months of the application cycle. So really excited for folks who are interested in applying and for getting you across the finish line. And I hope that today's conversation helps do that for you. So to put today's session into context, we're hosting one chat each month during the application season. Again, glad that you're here today, and we have one more live chat for you in October. Each chat has focused on different aspects of the fellowship experience and has featured different fellows as panelists. And so if you haven't been able to watch our live chats from earlier in the summer, they're all up on our YouTube channel where you can rewatch those as well, including this one. And today we're going to discuss what you can expect from the fellowship and its application and interview process. And a quick reminder, in case you haven't heard, we are accepting applications through November 1st. If you're still wondering if you're eligible to apply or interested in the application overview, I encourage you to visit our application portal to learn the ins and outs of the application. 2024 is actually a very special cycle. We have all 4 program areas that open to apply to. That includes our executive branch, our legislative, the fellowships in the legislative branch, our judicial fellowship, and again, unique for this cycle, the Roger Revelle Fellowship. And you are able to apply to up to 2 of these program areas in a given year. These fellowships are paid 1-year full-time commitment in Washington, D.C. For a sense of timing, someone who applies in 2024 will be considered for a position in the fellowship class that runs from September of 2025 up to August of 2026. And for the purpose of today's chat really is to getting answers to your questions. This is your chance to get to ask fellows directly. So use the question box in your menu bar as shown here. And if you like, you can indicate the person to whom your question is directed to. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can today. Now, I'm happy to introduce you to our fellows. Dr. Rebecca Panko is an evolutionary plant biologist specializing in urban landscape. She is an STPF fellow hosted at the Environmental Protection Agency, Office of Research and Development in the Integration and Evaluation Branch of the Integrated Climate Sciences Division of the Center for Public Health and Environmental Assessment. Dr. Panko addresses pressing and complex societal issues such as environmental injustice and green space inequity. She is working on several assessments that involve climate change related impacts on urban plant communities and their associated ecosystem services. These aim to establish best practices for incorporating green space and other nature-based solutions in cities to help mitigate the impacts of climate change and protect human health. Thank you. Welcome. Dr. Xavier Monroe is an education policy and sociology researcher focused on actualizing STEAM opportunities, equity-minded policies, and reform implementation, particularly for marginalized communities. Dr. Monroe currently serves as a AAAS Fellow at the National Science Foundation in the Office of the Assistant Director for the Directorate of Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. He earned an undergraduate degree in civil engineering and history from the University of Florida, a master's degree in educational leadership policy from the University of Michigan, and another in sociology from Stanford University, where he also completed his PhD in education policy and sociology of education, supported by an NSF graduate research fellowship. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he worked as a Title I intervention teacher at a comprehensive support and improvement school. Most recently, Dr. Monroe served as a AERA AAAS Congressional Science and Engineering Fellow on Capitol Hill, where he worked on policy issues such as artificial intelligence across various sectors and fusion energy. Since completing his doctorate, Dr. Monroe founded Newhouse Consulting LLC to translate research into real-world change through policy, practice, and reform. Thank you all for being here today. Really, really happy to have both of you. Before I go into questions from the audience, one to kick it off, and since today's chat is how about fellows, find out about STPF. What is, knowing what you know now, what do you wish you knew before you applied to STPF? And Rebecca, could you start us off?
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining today. Great to be here. What do I wish I knew? Well, it takes a long time to make a competitive application. I started my application probably in August with the intent, obviously, of submitting it in November. And so I probably wish I started just a little bit earlier because I was also in a postdoc at the time, and August is kind of like the beginning of the next semester. So it would have been nice to use a little bit more of my downtime in the summer when I was just doing research to apply. So longer time, but overall I felt I did pretty well. Definitely getting people to proofread your application is super important, whether that's you know, your current colleagues or other people, but that's my colleagues did that, and it made my application much more competitive.
David, do you want to talk through what something that you wish you knew before you applied?
Thank you. I would agree with what Rebecca shared. I would add that it's important to make sure that you have friends or colleagues that can review your application, that can give you unbiased feedback, and particularly unbiased feedback across a number of disciplines. The fellowship is really about having expertise in your area, but also being willing to branch out of your area of expertise and learn and be willing to think on your feet in a number of policy areas. And so having a varied perspective from a number of individuals is very helpful. And so I had friends from across the disciplinary spectrum read over my applications, provide feedback, ask challenging questions, simulate the interview environment, and that was helpful in the case of transferring from the congressional fellowship to the executive branch. That's a short time frame, and so you have to be respectful of folks' time, and so try to be proactive in the process as much as possible.
Something you mentioned, Rebecca, was kind of like making your application competitive and just kind of like what goes into that. We talked about proofreading, you guys, and kind of just like, you know, I think just showing effort, right, and carrying into the application is one thing. Is there something else that you might also be thinking about when you say like, because I get this question a lot too, is how do I stand out? How do I make myself a competitive candidate? What's like one thing that you've maybe noticed in your peers or something that you saw in the process that kind of helped you out?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So like, keep in mind that most people who are applying to the AAAS fellowship are pretty awesome, and they have doctorates. Usually they might have done postdocs. Some of them might have been working in their field for decades. Everybody's good. That's the point. Everybody is great. So standing out can be a challenge because the things that might make you stand out in other audiences, it's kind of status quo. So my best advice for you when writing all of your application materials is really do what you can to be true to yourself. Let your personality come out, obviously in a professional way. But for example, I'm a non-traditional student. I did not start college until my late 20s, and I actually got a GED during my teenage years. And in undergrad, that was always something I was very embarrassed about because it was just something. So even in grad school, it wasn't really something I talked about because nobody's business. But that's part of my story. And so I actually leaned in heavy in some of the personal statements and just talking about my journey and the challenges that I've overcome. And I do really think that made me stand out in that, you know, you really did get a good sense of who I am, what I stand for, and what things I'm passionate about. So obviously be professional, be aware of the state of things that you want to discuss, but don't overthink it, I guess, is the other thing. In the personal statement, you know, you kind of, or applicant statement, you kind of have a lot of wiggle room. They're asking you about like what things you're interested in. And I kind of went all over the place. You know, I mentioned that I had concerns about climate change at large. I had concerns about agricultural practices. I had concerns about the centralization of our food supply. I had a lot of different things, and I don't have expertise in a lot of those things, but those are things that I'm interested in, and I wanted them to know that I was.
I think I like to tell folks it's like, bring your full self into the application, right? And like, you just this will basically kind of, if you're eligible to apply, right, you're in a very special group of people, right? You're interested in policy, you're thinking about coming to DC, you have like this educational background, science background, and so I'm kind of leaning into that. I think is great advice, and I think what really stands out to the selection committee and thinking those things through. Sorry.
Yeah, and if I could add, one thing I've been so impressed with during the fellowship is the impressive diversity and unique personalities of people who hold these fellowships and of the staff. I mean, this is not a cookie cutter bunch. This is passionate, smart, unique individuals who want to do something with their efforts to make the world a better place. And it's just wonderful to see that, all of those different personalities, loud personalities, quiet personalities, people who speak multiple languages, people who speak one language. It's just a wonderful, wonderful group.
Xavier, anything to add on making yourself a competitive candidate? I know you kind of went through this in a quick period last year.
Sure. It's important to tell your story well. No one else will do it for you, and don't hide from doing that work, because it matters. It matters in policy spaces. It matters during the time where we need diverse voices, and we need to create inclusive spaces to do important policy work. And we, for instance, in our agency, we were just looking at a chart where we need to do the important work of making sure all voices are at the table, because that affects policy. And we need programs like AAAS fellowships to create opportunities and pathways to provide more policymakers, space for more policymakers in the room. And there is a history and a pipeline of that work, but it can always be better. And by telling your story at this stage, you create an opportunity for others to do that work. And so start by telling your story in your application. Do it well. Do it in the interview. Don't shy away from it. There's always a way to tell your story, but if you don't do it now, no one else will. And it's good practice when you have to sit in policymaking spaces in rooms. And be true to it, because it makes a difference with a small ripple. So I'm glad to hear about Rebecca's stories. I have a story, and it makes a difference.
And also, like, editing that story, letting other people read that story too. I think that's always always very helpful. We have a question from the audience, and someone's asking if it's a requirement to have policy experience into applying to the fellowship. I have answers, but if you guys want to maybe go into like what you had before the fellowship, or what you've been so far.
No, you do not have to come to this program as a policy expert. In fact, this is a professional development experience, and it's a bi-directional experience at that. Individuals in offices across government are learning from you just as much as you are learning from them. And so do not feel like you should be a policy expert, because you bring your level of expertise in whatever background that you have. And they should help you become a policy expert. This is the marriage of science and policy, or STEM and policy, whatever acronyms you want to use. And so that's why programs like AAAS exist, so that there's learning on both sides of this equation. Rebecca, what would you think? What would you add?
No, I think that's spot on. I also think, and it's going to depend on who your host office is, but I think there's a big advantage to having no policy background, really, because you come in with so much, you don't have as much baggage maybe as somebody who has gone through certain routes. You know, you're coming in fresh, you're coming in with new ideas. Um, you might not, those ideas may not be able to be worked through. You might not be able to do those things, but I think it's really good for different agencies to hear this fresh perspective, get this fresh enthusiasm, because it can make them reassess how they're doing things and maybe try some new approaches based on your ideas. So yeah, absolutely don't need any policy background.
Thank you guys. Sorry if my mic has been a little off. I'm trying to speak more clearly. Next question that we have is if it's best that applicants align their interests with STPF to basically, I think they're asking kind of like how to align your interest with what might be a bigger science topic as of now, right? So kind of how do like folks really tailor their interest to like maybe like the more pressing conversations that are happening within science policy today? So I think a lot about like AI, right? Like in the sense that like a lot of folks are tailoring their stuff to AI conversations, but for folks who are thinking about a career in policy, do you think they might need to align their interests to meet that, or do you think that they should kind of like maybe stick to what they know, or how would you maybe advise a candidate who's thinking about how to navigate this space where there are these hot button issues?
Sure, that's a good and salient question. Working on AI, and there seems to be a jump that everyone in the tech industry has to be the loudest voice in the room, and that's not a diss for folks in the tech industry. However, there's room and space for everyone else as well. So let's take, for instance, the humanities. There are ethical questions that we need to raise and consider in this emerging technological space. So there's space for those in anthropology and in the classics to have conversations. And what did this look like in the past? There's space for those in the social sciences, so sociology. How do we engage with how these technologies will impact various communities? And how do we have conversations about equity and access and inclusion and opportunity? And so this goes back to our earlier points of making sure you tell your story and tell it well, because this all engages with good STEM or science policy, because these conversations have to be had in a number of spaces across government. And so with the executive order that came out, increasing the whole of government approach means not just those with the technical know-how and the tech background, it's also those that have to engage with those creating the algorithms as well, because they have to be challenged in that background. And so there's a intermediary space that we have to consider as well. So there's room for everyone in this age to engage in these conversations, and there's expertise all around. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I echo most of that. I think that was that covered most of what I was going to say. One thing I would add would be just don't try to be buzzy. Like yes, okay, so there are certain words right now, and that and you're not going to be the only person who knows that buzzy word, right? So to Xavier's point about, you know, room for humanities, room for anthropologists, and to Xavier's point of how, you know, everything needs to continue evolving, and there are outstanding challenges that need solutions across fields. So when I mentioned in my application material, so my background, I'm a plant biologist, but I'm an evolutionary plant biologist. And so my expertise is in plants, but I'd had no expertise in policy, but I am aware of things that relate. So hence I'm aware of challenges writ large that involve plants that matter to me, right? Carbon sequestration, something that matters to me. Having sustainable food for people as climate changes is important to me. But keep in mind, when you're submitting these application materials, the host offices that are going to be reviewing those materials are all different, and they all have unique challenges that they're looking to address. So going to Xavier's point of being true to yourself, talk about the issues that matter to you. If they're not buzzy, don't care about that. If they are buzzy, great. But talk about the issues that matter to you in your application materials, even if you don't have any background in those. But you are passionate about finding resolutions to those challenges. That will ensure that when you go forward through the application process and eventually the interview process, that the host offices know what you're passionate about and it aligns with work that they're doing. The last thing you want to do, look, AAAS fellowship is a wonderful thing, and most people that I know have had a wonderful experience. But the people that I know that have not had a wonderful experience has been when it's been a bad fit host office wise. And adding buzzy things in your application that have nothing to do with your interests, that's one way to end up in a host office that you won't find very stimulating. So definitely trust your gut. There's a place for everyone, as Xavier said, in terms of topic area, and I would say avoid being buzzy.
I really appreciate that. I think talking about fit is so important for people considering the fellowship, right? I think, during finalist week, like these host offices you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, right? And so, being able to be like strong in your skill set and like comfortable with your skill set, I think it's like you're bringing so much value, right? And I think it's kind of like that perspective switch, where you kind of like, you're actually the person providing a ton of value, right? And so I think that's always a good way to kind of think about it, and especially if you're in the finalist piece. One of the questions that we're getting to is folks are asking about your experiences during the interview process. So I was wondering if you could kind of like give a quick rundown on what your interviews were like, maybe what different agencies you talked to, and kind of like why you ended up where you are.
Xavier, maybe you want to start because you have gone through this process, I think, more than once, right? Because you switched offices.
Yeah, I've gone through it a couple of times because I did Congress and now the executive branch.
Yeah, so yeah.
And they're very interesting, both different. It's a different process. And so what Rebecca's referring to is, in Congress there's a slightly different interview process. Some may say it's akin to med school matching, and then in the executive branch, there's the interview process is a little bit different because there's a couple of stages before you get to host office interviews. And so I don't know, Marab, how are we addressing that question? Are we assuming that they're getting to the final stage?
Yeah, so I was thinking like maybe you can talk through like select as a final stage for the executive branch, and then if you kind of like can maybe walk through what that looked like. I know it might have been different for you too, Xavier, as a remote.
Sure. So there's usually an interview with a panel, and those folks are usually AAAS alum and a program manager. And by that point, you will have written a memo. They will have asked you to write a memo, and you'll have about 10 days, I believe, Rebecca, it's 10 days to get.
Yeah, so what Xavier is talking about is, and this is not something I was, this was like a surprise to me a little bit. It wasn't when this process happened. So there's a pre-qualifying interview that kind of makes you a semi-finalist. So you're a semi-finalist and then you're a final finalist. And what Xavier is talking about right now is that semi-finalist part. And yeah, so they will let you know, hey, you're a semi-finalist, and hey, you're gonna have an interview, and hey, you have to give a 3-minute speech about a topic. Oh, and hey, the topic can't be anything you're an expert at. And hey, here's a list of topics, and here you're gonna write a 1-page memo. You got 9 days. We'll see you then. So that's what he's referring to. Yeah. And you're like, wait, it's a topic I'm not an expert in? No.
And then folks will introduce themselves at this meeting and say, here's 5 minutes to talk about your memo, go. and you should be prepared to talk about your memo and do it well. And this is good practice for if you're in Congress or the executive branch, where folks will come up and say, "What are your thoughts on this? What direction should we go? What should you have this expertise in this area? Can you tell me a little bit about this? You don't have expertise in this area. Can you tell me a little bit about this? Well, here's a topic that we asked you to read up on. Can you tell us a little bit about this?" And so that's what the assignment is really gauging. Can you think on your feet? Can you give us an argument, a logical argument, particularly on this topic that we asked you to write about? And this panel is really gauging your ability to speak logically, to speak in a limited amount of time, and to do so in an engaging way. And they will, after that 5 minutes, have questions for you. And again, it's also about being true to yourself, being authentic. You know, you cannot be overly prepared for that 5 minutes. And then after that presentation, it's a conversation. Some of the questions, you know, routine, you know, the typical HR questions. You know, we have this list of questions for you to answer. Then sometimes they're spur of the moment questions, and it's really about remaining again true to yourself. Can you work well with people? Can you engage with policy topics of the day? Can you go to any agency and contribute well? And so that's the interview process, is really about you showing up and your authentic self and doing well. And so I don't know, Rebecca, what would you add?
Yeah, so that semifinalist interview thing, that was super stressful, I'm gonna say. And even though, yes, you need to prepare as much as you can, keep in mind nobody out there is expecting that you have ever written a one-page memo about a topic that you're not an expert at, right? So you can find resources online. They will provide you resources as well to use as kind of like an idea. But also go to LinkedIn, reach out to former AAAS fellows, ask them. That's something I wish I would have known when I was going through the application process, is how receptive former AAAS fellows are to cold inquiries on LinkedIn, myself included. So that covers really that semi-finalist interview process. Then if you make it to the final interview process, that's a whole nother ballgame. And I can only speak to the executive branch because that's the only one that I have gone through. In that one, basically there's a platform and your application materials are there and the potential host office positions are there. You can look at them, they can look at you, you can request interviews, they can request interviews with you. You can say yes, you can say no, they can say yes, they can say no. If you get one, probably don't say no, just to even have the practice of going through the interview process. And this is another thing that I wasn't 100% clear on. Maybe I should have read the fine detail a little bit. So the first round, right, is your of these interviews. I think I had, I don't know, 4 or something like that. And during the finalist interview week, people are all the other, again, competitive group of people. So there'll be people walking around saying, oh, I had 12 interviews. I had whatever, 100 interviews. Yeah. It doesn't matter how many interviews you have. It matters that you have the right interview. So if you're one of those people and you only got 2 interviews and you have people walking around you saying, oh, I got 10, don't worry about that. Just make sure that you're having the right interviews, meaning with people that with positions that look interesting to you. And then it's similar to what Xavier said. It's kind of like apparently what med school is like. I never went to med school, but there's a matching process. So let's say you have 3 interviews, you're going to rank your interview choices 1, 2, 3. They have interviewed candidates, they're going to rank them 1, 2, 3. And the fellowship leadership will do their best to link host office with the fellow with who they both ranked each other high. First round, so apparently there's rounds because the first, here I did my interviews, I'm all excited, and then I get an email saying you didn't match, right? And in my situation, I think it was because the going into an interview, I was like, that's going to be the one, because I have all the skills for that one. That's going to be the one that I match with. And then after that interview, I was like, I've already done all of these things. So I don't really want to do that again. I'd rather learn something new. So I ranked them like last. They probably ranked me high. But anyways, that was disheartening because I get this email, like, you didn't match. Oh God, was it all this for nothing? Yeah, I did all this work and it's like I didn't match. And then like an hour later, I get an email saying, all right, get ready for interview round 2. And so keep that in mind too, because I was pretty, that wasn't made 100% clear to me that in that first email that that the process was continuing. So if you don't match the first round, you get a second round to match. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and a little bit about the Congress, that's a totally different beast. And there'll be a reception. It's not as organized. The executive branch is actually a little bit more organized. I don't know if they're changing it a little bit this year, but there'll be a reception. Reps and senators will come and give stump speeches. It's loud. People, depending on the office, people will have done their homework. They will come with like your resume and sometimes your picture. They will come up to you to try to meet, schedule interviews. You will walk around, you will schedule interviews all across the Capitol. Sometimes folks will land spots quickly, sometimes not. I had served as a congressional page many years ago, so I had a little bit of idea of how folks operated. So I played like hanging back because I did, as Rebecca said, it is about landing in an office where you can be happy. Um, and some folks can be competitive. Rebecca kind of alluded to this. Some folks will be so concerned about having a number of interviews. It's about having interviews in places where you will feel comfortable and have a good experience. And so in Congress, it's a very similar interview process where you can have a lot or very few. It's about landing the right interview where you will have a positive experience. And sometimes you'll have a number of interviews already set up. You might also have to reach out and schedule interviews. Very similar in that regards, but it is not as organized as the executive branch.
I guess the very last thing that I'll add is that when the host offices are putting out the description of the work, keep in mind that it's kind of generalized. So when you do go through the interview process, you want to really ask specific questions. If there's certain work that you definitely don't want to do, or you need to, so take the description with a grain of salt. For example, there was one host office that I was really strongly considering, and it was talking a lot about things that I'm interested in, like climate change and things like that. But then when I wanted to know more about what the day-to-day was in terms of work. And so during the interview process, I said, when I'm reading this description, I'm getting the sense that a lot of this is grant review. How much of my job or how much of my participation will be involved in reviewing grants. And the person I was meeting with said, oh yeah, that'll probably be about 80% of your task. And for me, that wasn't something I was interested in, but that was not clear in the description of the day-to-day. So make sure you ask a lot of questions. What's the program culture like, etc. During those interviews. Yeah, you are interviewing, just like Amirab said, like you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So ask questions to find out what your day-to-day is going to be like.
Yeah, and on the flip side too, like if you get an interview, and like Rebecca says, like if you get an interview request and it's an agency you weren't thinking about at all, right? Still take it because they might have something for you, right? And so kind of I think whatever your skill set is, whatever you're bringing, right? Kind of like coming to that finalist stage with an open mind is I think like the best asset for a candidate to have to make sure you'll get placed. And again, like we make sure that most of us get placed as well. So even like Rebecca, like you have the story of like not going through in the first round, right? So it's something we definitely strive to do. Another question that we have is kind of like if you can kind of like speak to the contributions that you've made to your agency. So kind of like, I think a good way to frame this is maybe, I think, how did you end up choosing the agency? I think Rebecca for UPA and Xavier for NSF. Kind of like how you ended up there, and then like maybe what are you expecting to do, or like contributions you've already made so far.
So Rebecca, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I've always been a very independently driven person. So like during grad school, even I created all of my topics of like I curated my own research trajectory. So maintaining something like that was important to me, being able to like look at the state of where things are at and then try to come up with new ways to solve different problems. So at my host office, which is Office of Research and Development, there's a new division there with the Integrated Climate Sciences Division, and through conversations with colleagues that have been there for a long time and the different funding opportunities like through the IRA that came out this last in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a lot of ability to create new projects over the next time frame. And so I co-led and developed about 3 assessments. That's what we do primarily in my division is different assessments. And so one that was mentioned at the top during the bio, so one focuses on green space and human health. Another one focuses on forest ecosystem health and how forests are going to be impacted by and impact climate change patterns. And then another one that I spearheaded, it deals with trying to mitigate environmental justice concerns in urban areas, particularly as it relates to green space in the future, like in the next 10 to 30 years for as cities expand into new areas. So those have been some of the projects that I've helped develop at my host office, which has been super satisfying for me because, like I said, I like to start things from the beginning, implement them, assess them. I like to see things all the way through. So that's been really rewarding. And another thing that I've been able to do through the host office is there is an organization that's called the United States Global Research Program, or the USGCRP. They're the ones who every 4 years or so put out the National Climate Assessment, the last of which just came out last November. They're undergoing a new initiative. It's an interagency initiative. So like NOAA is there, NASA is there, the White House is there, doing this national nature assessment. And so through my host office, I'm on the federal steering committee for the National Nature Assessment with the USGCRP. So that's been really cool too, because I've been able to engage with people all across different agencies and meet people. What am I planning to do? I think that was the follow-up question. Like, right? Okay, good. I'm keeping track here. I'm planning to stay. So believe it or not, I'm one of these. I got lucky timing wise where I was able to apply for a position at my host office in my exact same division with my exact same supervisors. And I am in the process of being onboarded right now. So my second year of the fellowship just ended in August. So 1st of September, I was I'm unemployed basically, but I onboard at my existing office in the first week of October. So I'm actually on vacation right now. That's why, hence I'm in this like pastoral loggy setting. But yeah, so I liked my short version. I liked my host office so much and the people there and the work we're doing that I want to stay on permanently, and I am.
Well, first, congratulations, Rebecca. Like that is like what you call like a very good transition from the fellowship program. Some fellows like love for that to happen, including on Congress too. So, so that's like a big congratulations to Rebecca. So why NSF? One, after the year in Congress, it's nice to go to a place that has, a nice vibe and that's doing some interesting work. That is no diss to Congress. That is no diss to Congress because now Congress funds NSF. But it's nice to come to an agency that's a big part of some of the innovative work that's been funded by like some of the legislation that Rebecca was just talking about, particularly CHIPS and Science Act. It's been a big part of the current administration, and that's part of some of the work that I'll be doing. And so I'm excited, particularly because of my background in working on those issues and working on those issues for communities that have been left out of the conversation. I'm jumping into a meeting today on that topic. This is actually my first official full day at the agency. And it's also nice to be a part of a team where fellows are valued fully in doing the work. So what we were talking about earlier is go where you'll be appreciated, where you'll be valued in the work, where you don't have to feel as if you're an expert, because this is not fully my expertise. But I'll get to grow and learn, but also where I know where my voice will be valued. And so that's what I'm looking forward to the most, growing in the work and contributing to the work, particularly in an area that the nation is growing as a whole. And so CHIPS and Science has a lot of potential. It's been authorized. It still has to be appropriated. So that means the money still has to flow. And that means we have to measure, which is part of the work we're doing, and evaluate the initial seed funds. And part of this work includes public-private partnerships with universities and business, which is part of what NSF is doing. And so I'm excited to do that, particularly after coming from the legislative side of this work. And so moving forward, I just started on this side. So I look forward to doing that work and seeing where it leads me career-wise.
It's awesome. Uh, so kind of switching gears a little bit, we're getting a ton of questions about how you chose your references and how that process was incorporated in your application. So um, I'm wondering if you guys could share like how you picked your references and why you picked them, and then I can maybe share a little bit on like what that process is like for folks at the applicant board.
So for me, it's simple. I don't forget the people that brought me. I stay in touch with my advisors, my college professors, um, because they speak to the work I've done. They speak to the type of person that I am. And of course, the people that you continue to work with. I think it's important that you also choose individuals that can speak to different aspects of your work and who you are, because it complements uh, uh, where we're talking about telling your story well. You have to have folks that can also tell your story well in different aspects of who you are, because policy is a broad spectrum, and it requires um, a holistic approach. And so individuals that can support uh, that storytelling, that narrative from a broad perspective as well, but a unified perspective is important. And so that's something I consider when I choose my references. And usually it's folks that I've worked with over several years, and who know me well as an individual.
Yeah, I always think there's always weird people have on LinkedIn. People have asked me this too in those cold call for the AAAS application, and I don't know what it is about. There must be some rumor out there about like the references, but for me, it's a no-brainer. Like I did undergrad research, so I gave my undergrad research advisor. I did research in grad school. I didn't gave my graduate research advisor, and then I did a postdoc. I gave my postdoc research advisor. So those are all people that as Xavier mentioned, like I've worked with for years. They know me. They know me personally. They know my work ethic. So definitely, when it comes down to references for the AAAS, I would recommend professional references as versus personal references. If there's a reason why, now, if there's a reason why you have, maybe you've been in a toxic work environment. I know people who've had very bad relationships with their graduate advisors, for example, right? Come from toxic academic departments. If that's the case, fine. Yeah, there's other people that you can use. Maybe you've done some university service. Maybe you've volunteered, but definitely somebody who's known you, who knows you personally, and maybe not just somebody who was a professor of yours in a course or something like that. Somebody who can talk to your strengths, talk to your weaknesses, and who's rooting for you.
Yes, I think all that is true. I think first and foremost, like, know that your reference is going to write positively about you, right? I think that's something that can definitely trip up folks. I think, I think if I understand too why people answer that much, because like there may be people who you expect should be your reference, and they might not be someone that you do. So I think that's all great advice if that is the case. I will say, like, it is an important part of the application, right? I think it's something that we consider, and something that I spend a lot of the last 2 weeks of October is making sure that the references get submitted. And so knowing that like you'll have somebody who will write a positive reference, but will also submit the reference too, right? I think it's always making sure like that you have somebody who's able to do that on your behalf, and it's something that I and like, to be honest, like the best thing about this is doing this ahead of time, right? Like if you're asking for a reference on October 20th, that's really cutting it, so we part of the application is that those have to be submitted by the application deadline too, and there's a ton of wiggle room on that, so get ahead of your references is the thing I would like to scream from the rooftops. Yeah.
And to that point, I feel like my references, even though they knew me very well and my work ethic very well, they didn't know anything really about the AAAS fellowship. So in addition to being respectful of the time of your references for them to be able to prepare materials, you may need to spend time kind of educating them about what this role is like, why you're interested in pursuing this role, and depending on your reference, you may even consider giving them drafts or finalized versions of your application materials so that they can see what aspects of yourself you're highlighting, and then draw upon their experiences that they have had with you to help support some of those statements.
Yeah, I second what Rebecca just did. And in my case, because AAAS had done the story for me, I was able to just like send that link to my references and say, hey, here's the story. So as you update this recommendation, here's some things I've been working on. So it's like very important to be considerate of people's time, so that they are writing with a positive feeling for your recommendation.
Yeah, I come from like the college access world. The AAAS, the STPF application reminds me a lot of a college application, right? And I don't know if you remember when you like give your teachers like your resume about what to write about. It's kind of like that was your story, it was teachers being able to get that done. One of the questions that folks are also asking about is just the timeline. I know it's a really long timeline for folks, especially if you're basically planning for a year ahead. Rebecca, I think you might have like the most to speak on it. If you want to maybe speak to what your timeline was once you applied to the fellowship and to when you actually started, it could be helpful just for folks to plan that out.
Yeah, so the application is due in November. I started the materials in August. I gave all my materials to my proofreaders by probably the first week of October. You will turn in the application mid-November. You will get notified, I think it's in January. Yep. So you send it in November, you're not going to hear anything until at least January. January, they'll let you know if you've become a semifinalist. If you are a semifinalist, you'll have 9 days to prepare that 1-page memo and your 5-minute speech. You'll have that panel semifinalist interview. That will be usually end of January, maybe first week of February, depending on that. You'll find out, I think, in March or early April, whether you've become a finalist. And then finalist interview week is in, I want to say May. Is May right? Yeah. Yeah. And so why, and it's a good question to ask because it's going to involve some planning. So for me, for my example, I was doing a postdoc out in Michigan, and I had a place I was renting. And so it was like, here I am in May, and my leasing office keep calling me saying like, are you going to renew? You're going to renew? And I was like, listen, I don't know yet because I might be moving to Washington. So you probably won't find out if you okay, you'll find out in May if you're a finalist, but you probably won't be matched with your host office if you go a second round like I did until at least the end of May. So that means you won't know until probably June. You're expected in Washington in August. And that's just the reality of it. So for me, unfortunately, that meant that I paid rent in 2 places for the month of July in 2022 because I just didn't have enough information to be able to. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing, and I wish is something I would have known then would help me plan, and we could talk more about this if we have time. Certain host offices will pay for the move, give you moving expenses. Certain host offices will not provide moving costs. That's a question to ask during the interviews if that's something that matters to you. And because of the time frame of being onboarded, if you're successfully chosen as a fellow and you do your orientation week and you start September 1st, you won't receive your first fellowship payment paycheck until the end of September 30th. There's a pay period time gap. So I know that might be going too forward with the time period, but I wish I would have known that when I moved from Michigan, and it's all budgeting planning is as important sometimes.
Yeah, Rebecca's giving you all the real details. You will be tired on some of those things. You will worry. There are like group chats where you can like ask for help, like where do I need to stay? Where's some temporary housing? Folks will not let you fall. And AAAS fellows are very hospitable, and will connect you with folks and tap you into the alumni group. So that's been good community. And even during orientation, AAAS feeds you well. Even though the days can be long, AAAS does feed you well. So that's an expense you might not have to worry about.
Awesome. So I think we're at time for around one last question. There's one question in the chat I definitely want to get to. It's from a senior faculty member who's talking about if this fellowship is a good fit for them, and it sounds like it's a lot for younger folks. One, no. Two, I was wondering if either of you can maybe talk to the fellowship cohort that you're a part of and kind of speak to like the differences, experiences that you might see, the connections you maybe have made, but really kind of, I think what's unique about our fellowship program is once you have that qualifying degree, you can apply at any career stage, and that's definitely reflected within the fellowship. So if you guys can maybe say a few words about your cohort, and if you got to know them, kind of who they are, that would be wonderful. Go ahead, Xavier.
Okay, sure. I'll start with yes. The cohort is very diverse in that way. Folks come from all career backgrounds, from senior faculty to just starting out. As a matter of fact, one of the folks I met this year is a department chair who will be influencing policy on Capitol Hill. So the program really makes room for all levels of expertise, and it's needed. And I'm fortunate to now span a couple of classes now, and it's nice to make new friends. It's nice to see where folks are going across government, and to stay in contact with fellows all across DC. I think it's an important part of the program. It's important to build those communities. and particularly before, during, and after orientation, and to build authentic community at that. And so I appreciate that level of that diversity of experience and backgrounds come to the program, because it's needed in Washington. I think it's needed in our camaraderie. I don't know, Rebecca, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, and we touched on it a little earlier too. It's just how incredibly diverse in every way the fellows are. There's people who are fresh out of their PhD program. There's people who, like me, were coming from a postdoc. All of the cohort I had at EPA were all associate professors that were looking for a change. I remember in my first year, one of my favorite people that I met was actually a veterinarian. But I don't even know if he had a PhD. I think he had a medical degree, but you know, he had worked his whole life as a veterinarian and had some big passions, and so he was a fellow. I've also met other people. There is an exception. Like usually you have to have a PhD, but I have met a few that are, you know, they're 35 years into their career, you know, and they're also there. So the gauntlet. Yeah.
To clarify, it's a PhD or like a master's in engineering with professional experience. If you have a doctoral degree, so like a veterinarian, like I forget what the specific term was. I went to APMA this year. And there's a lot of veterinarians. They have like a veterinary degree that qualifies too. So.
And there's some physicians as well, right? We have physicians in the cohort as well.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of physicians, like, you know, physicians, mathematicians, things that social scientists, right? So we have this idea of like who a scientist looks like, right? So making sure that like we are still recruiting from and making sure that those folks know that they can apply to this too is important. So yeah, we're at time. If we want to kind of get towards the end, thank you all for participating in today's chat. The next live chat is going to be, there it is, October 15th. It's again, ask a fellow anything, so we'll have some more tips on the application and interview process, continuing this conversation that we have here. Tons and tons of questions today. I'm so sorry that we weren't able to get to all of them, but please reach out to fellowships@AAAS.org, and we will respond to your email then. It's busy. It's a very busy time for us as we wrap up this application cycle, but please, you know, get started, finish those materials. If you have questions while you're working through the app, our team is here to help you get to the finish line. So please use those resources, and you know, hope to see you apply. Until then, have a great day. Rebecca and Xavier, thank you so much. Have a good one, y'all.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.